Please welcome to the stage Reginald DesRoches, President of Rice University, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Lauren Kiel.
Good morning, everyone. President DesRoches is the head of a major U.S. research university. You get a front-hand seat and really a driver's seat role in so many of the major issues that we've been talking about at Davos this week. You're experiencing, the rapid surge of AI and what that's going to mean for your students in training. You're experiencing what it means to research on a global stage with politics changing. You're seeing what business is doing. So there's so many amazing things that you are focusing on. And I really want to start with looking at your own backyard in Texas. We've seen so many major companies like Tesla, HP, other major corporations relocating their headquarters to Texas. What makes your community such an attractive environment for businesses? And from your vantage point leading Rice, how do universities contribute to that growth story we're seeing in Texas?
Thank you for the question, Lauren. Thank you for being here. It's great to be with you. Texas is it's a very business-friendly state, and we're seeing tons of companies move there because of the business-friendly nature. It's a very affordable place to live. And in fact, that's helped us recruit faculty to the university because they want to come to a place where there's lots of industry. And there's a lot of talent in Texas. So these companies are interested in leveraging the talent. It's a growing state. It's a dynamic state. Texas is investing significantly in a range of areas that are critical, not just for Houston and Texas, but for the globe around AI, most recently brain health, digital health, clean tech. And so it's really an exciting time to be a university in Texas, to be able to partner with all the industries that are there. And it's a very friendly state in terms of the partnerships that take place between industries, universities, as well as nonprofits. And we certainly benefit from that.
And I know you've talked a lot about the connection to Houston and kind of the urban identity, the urban research is a defining feature that you see in Rice. How do you think about the university's connection to the community, what you provide to it, how you benefit from it? What challenges are you uniquely positioned to solve for your community?
It truly is a critical part of how we educate our students, being an urban campus, and the research that we do. So Rice University is at the heart of Houston, Texas, located next to the largest medical center in the world, adjacent to us, 2 miles from downtown Houston, third largest number of Fortune 500 companies in the US, 30-minute drive from Johnson Space Center. And so we're embedded in this incredible ecosystem, and we certainly greatly benefit from that as a living laboratory. So I'll just give you one example of some of the fundamental research that we do and how it leverages the living laboratory of Houston and the ecosystem there. So we have a well-known center that predicts flooding and tries to prevent disasters from happening called the Speed Center as part of our civil engineering department. I'm a civil engineer myself. And that group several years ago developed a technology to be able to predict the flooding using topology information and climate models prior to a storm happening so that the Texas Medical Center region can make sure they take the right precautions to prevent disasters from happening in that region and damage to some of the infrastructure. And now that model is being used in other parts of Texas, including the Hill Country that had recent flooding. And we get guests from all over the world trying to understand how we're implementing that system so that they can replicate it in their areas. And we wouldn't be able to do that without the partnership that we have in the city of Houston and being in this living laboratory.
And how do you think about your role creating economic value for the city and your community? Do you feel a responsibility as a big employer, the student communities that you bring in, the research that you do, to be an economic center?
We do, and it's obviously one economic value we have is the talent that we provide to the city of Houston in terms of the students that we produce and the upskilling that we do, and we could talk more about upskilling, but also in terms of the research. I mean, people don't realize the fundamental research that we do, the federal grants that we get from the U.S. government directly impact the economics of the city of Houston. There have been studies that have shown that for every dollar of federal research that comes into a university, $2 to $3 of economic value is generated in the community through the jobs that are created. So that's certainly one direct way that the university feeds the economic development in the city of Houston and the state of Texas. The other is through the innovation. Many of our faculty create companies from the fundamental research that takes place. We've had hundreds of companies formed. Many of them stayed in the city of Houston or in Texas, and those companies have raised billions of dollars in startup funds. And so there's direct benefit to the city in terms of the research enterprise.
You mentioned upskilling, and I want to talk about this, especially given what we just heard beforehand about the role of universities and the training that they can provide for not just the next generation, but as people are trying to change their skill sets, as the companies are needing different things from the students. How are you working with business to understand what they actually want from the students that you're sending out into the world? And how is it changing the type of curriculums that you're creating, the type of programs or certifications that you produce? How is that evolving?
Yeah, so we have direct conversation with industry in part because they're right there and we have close relationships. They're always on campus. Every day we have numerous people from industry talking to our students, talking directly to me. As head of the university, and we constantly hear from them what they're looking for from our undergraduates as well as our graduate students. So I'll answer that in two pieces. Certainly the undergraduates, we constantly hear from them. We really want students that have these, people call them soft skills. I don't call them soft skills because they're very hard, but communication skills, adaptability, and teamwork. And those are things that are actually developed in many ways outside the classroom through the various things that the students do on campus, study abroad, internships. And so we really, as an institution, are focused on making sure we provide those opportunities. In the area of upskilling, one of the things we benefit from is the constant conversation hearing from industry about their needs. And we have the ability to do bespoke programs just for the industries there. As an example, we had a major oil and gas company come to us several years ago and say, we want our employees to understand AI and data science. Can you develop a master's program for our employees who are not engineers, who do not have a background in this area, but we know they need those skills. So we developed them just for that particular company, and they had several dozen people take that. And we've done the same thing for the local Texas Medical Center, where they said the doctors want to understand the finance of healthcare. Can you develop a program for them? So we do a number of those things in addition to short courses and certificates and programs like that.
I think so many of us who went to university before the age of AI, which is probably everybody in this room, right? Can't imagine what it's like to write a paper today, or how you're preparing students for needing to be able to use these technologies, but also not atrophying their other skills, or taking advantage of some of that critical thinking. So how are you, in your role, balancing those pressures of wanting your students to be ready for what the career world is going to look for them, what the workforce is going to look for them, but also making sure that they don't lean too heavily on these things that are going to take away some of those fundamentals of what it means to stay up all night and write a paper in the library because that's the only way to do it.
It is a constant conversation that many leaders in higher ed are having, is how do you educate the student in the age of AI? And for us, our approach has been to ensure that our faculty are as fluent as possible in AI so that they can understand how to best use it in the classroom to make sure that they're enhancing the critical thinking skills and not replacing the learning that they know needs to take place. And we've rolled out a whole suite of programs for our faculty, from one-on-one counseling to boot camps, to make sure that they understand the best use of AI responsibly in their classroom, including in first-year writing. I mean, we didn't think any of our faculty would be interested or dare to use AI in your fundamental writing class, but we have a number of faculty who say there is a place for AI to enhance the learning of our students. And so we've seen a major embracement of AI as a way of really enhancing the learning and the creative thinking skills of our students, and we've been pleased to see that.
Another thing people think about often is, given that we're at a global event, when they think about U.S. education, they think, wow, it's so expensive compared to a lot of international universities. How do you make sure that is not what is true? How do you make sure that we're not setting up a generation of American students for costs that are so high that it's going to impact them for the rest of their careers? And how do you think about your role, representing American universities in that space compared to working with international universities and making sure that the U.S. stays a competitive location for students who are both domestic and people who are coming from abroad?
Yeah, there is a major misunderstanding around the cost of education in the U.S., particularly from abroad. There's a sticker price and then there's a real price. And for us, we're really focused on being as accessible and affordable as possible. So we have a program called the Rice Investment that was launched several years ago that provides free tuition to students whose families make up to $150,000 and some level of tuition up to $300,000. So I think people don't really quite understand it. It's not just Rice. There are many of my peers across the U.S. are also really focused on making sure that universities are as accessible and affordable as possible. And for us, we continue to do that. We're growing the university by 40%. which is really significant. You're not finding universities like Rice that are growing, and we're going to remain committed to making sure that we remain affordable and provide that financial aid. We're committed to making sure that we have small class sizes, a 6-to-1 student-faculty ratio. So we're doing all these things, not just to remain competitive, but to make sure that we're providing a true quality education.
One of the major things that you do at Rice is being a research university, and we've seen major cuts to federal funding for research in the United States over the last year. How are you all navigating that? How do you keep that core of the research going? How are you getting through that?
Yeah, so several years ago, we went through a strategic planning process where we developed the areas where we want to do research around sustainable energy, around innovations in health and urban research. And we're not straying away from that. I think people need to be careful to try to shift their research focus areas based on what the various administrations and the areas that they may be interested in funding. So for us, we're going to stay to that. One of the things we realize we need to do is to make sure we diversify the funding sources that we get, not just depend on the federal government, which has been the biggest funder, but now we're focused on how do we work with local industries, how do we work with nonprofits. There are tons of nonprofits in the Houston area. So we're really focused on not just diversifying within the federal government the areas of research, but also trying to look for a wider breadth of potential funders in the area.
You've also been expanding Rice's international footprint. So how do you think about what that looks like, where you expand, what makes sense for the university?
Yeah, so we have a campus now in Paris, and we have a growing presence in Bangalore, India. And there are really two things when we think about where we want to expand and what we want to get out of our international presence and programs. One is research partnerships. And so in the case of our Paris campus, we've hosted a series of workshops over the last few years, engaging researchers, top researchers from Rice University in the US with researchers in Europe. Just this past year alone, I think there were 30 different papers that were written based on the collaborations that we had just this past year alone in Europe. And so forming research partnerships is one of the key reasons that we want to do that with some of the talent that resides everywhere around the world. And the other is to provide our students with unique opportunities to study abroad. And so this past year, we had several hundred students study in Paris. This past fall, we had our first full semester abroad for students who want to study in Paris, and we're looking to expand that. People don't realize just how life-changing it is. We have students that have never left their state in some cases or their community. For them to come and spend a semester in Paris or a semester in Bangalore, and I hear this directly from the students, it is truly life-changing, and we want to try to bring that to as many students as possible.
And then on a personal note, you're an engineer by training and by career experience. So how do you think in your role now, where you really are the CEO of a university, you're running a board, you're in a very similar position to many corporate leaders, how does that training and experience as an engineer impact the way that you lead the university?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm often asked that, and I'm actually the first engineering president of Rice University. I think that some of the skills are very similar. For me, I always break down problems into bite-sized pieces. The critical thinking that comes from an engineering degree. My area of research was around resilience, and certainly I think that's very relevant now in how you adapt to the various changes that take place, and certainly there are lots of changes in higher ed. So there are lots of parallels between my training as an earthquake engineer and building resilient communities and what's happening right now.
And in bringing Rice to Davos, being here on a global stage with all these world leaders, what's the one message you want to leave them with?
It's an exciting time. I think it's an exciting time for higher education. The partnerships that we're building are critical. I'm excited about the future of higher ed. People often ask me what gives you the most hope as a university president, and it's working with the students. I spend a lot of time talking to students, and they're just exceptionally bright and hopeful. And despite all the challenges we're facing in the world, I know we're in a good place because we have incredible students.
Fantastic. President DesRoches, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation.
Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you all so much for being here this morning. This concludes our program for the morning today. We want to say thank you to our sponsor, Rice University, for supporting this breakfast session. We will be back here at 11:20 for our next session. We'll include an interview with the president of Argentina. Hope to see you all again then. Thanks so much.